What would you do if an alien armada, so massive it literally blotted out the stars, decided to park right in your cosmic front yard? We're talking 300 warships, the personal, "we're here to ruin your Millennium fleet" from the Galactic Hegemony Council. Every single vessel was bigger than anything humanity had ever dreamed of building. They weren't just ships, they were floating monuments to fear, engineered to make you surrender before a single shot was ever fired. From the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Grand Admiral Zixth watched it all, his four eyes gleaming with an ancient predatory satisfaction. This was the first move in a 50,000-year-old strategy that had never, ever failed. The game plan was simple: show up with overwhelming force, play a highlight reel of all the planets you've turned to dust, and then wait for the new species to completely freak out. The hegemony ships weren't just built from metal. Their hulls were literally decorated with the bones and skulls of species they had already wiped from existence. Giant tattered banners made from the flags of conquered worlds fluttered in the void between cannons the size of skyscrapers. And for the grand finale, every ship was broadcasting a symphony of pure terror, the recorded last words and desperate screams of hundreds of civilizations that were now nothing but ghost stories. This was psychological warfare turned up to 11. "The human diplomatic ship is on its way," his second-in-command reported. He was a lanky Vexillonian whose skin shifted color with his mood. Right now, he was a shimmering, arrogant purple. Zixth just savored the moment. The humans were cosmic toddlers, brand new to the galactic playground. They'd only been hopping between stars for a couple of hundred years, controlling a tiny little cluster of about 30 systems. Their technology was cute. And their military? It was basically a glorified neighborhood watch, with tiny patrol ships that couldn't even dent the armor on one of his dreadnoughts. The human ship that approached was like a goldfish swimming up to a great white shark. It was small, sleek, and practical. No spooky decorations, no menacing lights. It was just a ship, almost boringly efficient. "Put them on the main screen," Zixth commanded. "Let's get this surrender over with." The view screen flickered to life, revealing the bridge of the human vessel. A lone man stood there in a simple, crisp uniform. He had dark hair and calm, analytical eyes that seemed to absorb every detail without a hint of fear. According to their intel, this was a Captain Park Minjun, a diplomatic nobody. "Captain Park," Zixth's voice thundered, a sound engineered to shake moons in their orbit. "You are witnessing the might of the Galactic Hegemony Council. We are an alliance of 4,000 species, masters of over 70,000 worlds. Now, let me give you a little demonstration of what happens when someone says no." With a casual flick of his wrist, Zixth started the show. Enormous holographic images erupted in the space between the two fleets, showing world after world engulfed in flames. Cities crumbled into dust. Panicked citizens fled in absolute terror. It was a greatest hits collection of total devastation, perfectly edited to inflict maximum psychological trauma. The videos showed parents begging for the lives of their children and proud warriors, dropping their weapons in utter defeat. It was a masterclass in capturing the exact moment all hope dies. The entire time, Zixth kept his eyes locked on Captain Park's face, waiting for him to break. This was the part where it always happened. The trembling hands, the bead of sweat on the brow, the silent scream that appeared in their eyes. Some would weep openly. Others would try to hang on to their dignity even as their bodies betrayed their terror. But every single one of them understood in that moment that fighting back was pointless. Captain Park's reaction, however, was strange. His lips were pressed into a thin white line, as if he was fighting with all his might to hold something back. His shoulders were vibrating, but just barely. Was this how humans expressed fear? The intelligence reports had been a bit fuzzy on their stress responses. "This is the cost of defiance," Zixth boomed, getting into his groove. He'd made this speech 1,000 times. "The hegemony offers you a simple choice. Join us, and your people will be spared. Resist, and you will be erased from history." Suddenly, Captain Park slapped a hand over his mouth and let out a choked cough, his face turning a deep shade of crimson. Ah, there it is, Zix thought with satisfaction. The terror is finally breaking through. The human was trying to keep his composure, but his body was failing him. We have crushed empires with weapons you cannot even comprehend, Zix pressed on, enjoying the moment. We shattered civilizations that ruled the stars for 10,000 years before your ancestors even learned to make fire. We have turned entire homeworlds into dead, floating rocks that serve as a warning to all who would oppose us. He then ordered the holograms to zoom in on the skulls decorating his own ship, each one a trophy from a species that had foolishly chosen to resist. The camera lingered on some of the more bizarre-looking skulls, a silent testament to the hegemony's absolute power. By this point, Captain Park's shoulders were shaking uncontrollably. He looked like he was having trouble catching his breath. His face was the color of a ripe tomato, and his eyes were watering. I must, Park sputtered, his voice cracking with strain. I have to request a short recess to consult with Earth. This is an incredibly significant decision. Hook, line, and sinker, Zix thought, a smug grin spreading across his face. The human could barely speak, he was so terrified. He was just trying to buy a few pathetic hours, hoping for a miracle that wasn't coming. You have 12 of your hours, Zix granted, feeling generous. Consider your options very carefully, Captain Park. Look at our fleet, count our weapons, and understand that this is only a tiny fraction of our true strength. I will expect your unconditional surrender when we speak again. With that, he cut the transmission. Zix turned to his bridge crew, a triumphant look on his face. Another one for the archives. Now let's dial up the pressure. I want every intimidation system at maximum power. By the time that captain calls us back, he'll be begging us to accept his surrender. The crew moved with the smooth efficiency of a predator closing in for the kill. Across the vast armada, more lights flared to life, more ghostly screams echoed through the void, and the ships shifted into an even more threatening formation. But what Zix didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that aboard that tiny human ship, Captain Park Minjin had finally lost his battle for composure. He wasn't crying. He wasn't screaming in terror. He was laughing. He was laughing so hard that tears were streaming down his cheeks, and every time he glanced at a replay of the hegemony's terrifying fleet, he would bend over, howling with laughter all over again. And all around him, his entire crew was doing the exact same thing. "Sir," his first officer said, wiping a tear of pure hilarity from her eye, "I'm trying to write this report for Earth Command, but I can't stop giggling. Did you see the skulls they hot-glued to their ships? It looks like they raided a Halloween superstore." Park took a deep, shuddering breath, trying to regain control. I know. We have to maintain a professional demeanor. They obviously think this is very serious, even if it's the most absurd thing I've ever witnessed." He opened a secure channel to Earth, and a moment later, the faces of humanity's top military and political leaders appeared on the screen. Park did his absolute best to deliver the report with a straight face, detailing the fleet, the threats, and the whole spooky song and dance. After he finished, there was a long, stunned silence from the command center on Earth. Then, a quiet little snort came from one of the generals. A second later, the entire room erupted in roaring, gut-busting laughter. "My apologies, Captain," Admiral Kim said, gasping for air. "But did they honestly believe that skulls would frighten us? Have they done literally any research on human beings?" "All evidence suggests no, Admiral," Park replied. "They seemed incredibly proud of them. I think this tactic actually works on other species." "Oh, it absolutely does," a new voice interjected. It was Dr. Sarah Martinez, humanity's foremost xenopsychologist. "Most species that reach the stars are collaborative, not competitive. They tend to be cautious, peaceful, and focused on community. The very idea of violent death is fundamentally horrifying to them," she explained. "But humans, we're the weirdos of the galaxy. We are one of the only apex predators to ever achieve spaceflight. We evolved over millions of years by both hunting and being hunted. For us, death isn't some terrifying abstract concept. It's an old friend. We've spent our entire history telling stories about it, creating art about it, and even turning it into a multi-billion-dollar entertainment industry. So their big, scary fear campaign just doesn't land with us, Park said, the realization dawning on him. It's worse than that, Martinez corrected him, a wide grin on her face. It doesn't just fail to scare us, it lands squarely in the category of things we find hilarious. This over-the-top, trying way too hard brand of scary? We invented entire genres dedicated to it. We call them horror movies, haunted houses, and heavy metal concerts. We literally pay money to be scared for fun. Back on Earth, human ships were scrambling to rendezvous with Captain Park's vessel. But this wasn't some mighty war fleet getting ready for battle. It was a standard diplomatic contingent designed for observation and first contact protocols. Nobody seriously thought these aliens, who called themselves the hegemony, would actually start shooting. If they really wanted to wipe out humanity, they could have just done it instead of putting on this ridiculously theatrical light show. As the human ships arrived at the meeting point, crew members were practically glued to the viewports, snapping pictures of the alien fleet. Within minutes, the photos went viral across all human social networks. Aboard his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, Grand Admiral Zixth was getting more and more confused by the minute. My intelligence team was supposed to be intercepting humanity's terrified, encrypted communications. Instead, what they found made absolutely no sense. My specialist turned to me, her voice shaking with confusion. "Admiral, the humans are broadcasting on open frequencies. It's not military code. It's what they call social media." "On screen," I ordered. The main view screen lit up with a flood of human chatter. I watched completely dumbfounded as human sailors posted pictures of my fearsome armada with captions like, "Okay, this is the most incredible haunted house I've ever seen," and "Wow, these aliens really go all out for Halloween." They were comparing my warships to amusement park rides and saying we were trying way too hard to be spooky. One particular post, which was getting a ton of likes, zoomed in on the terrifying skull insignia of my flagship dreadnought. The human text written over it said, "This is what you get when you order your galaxy-conquering fleet from a pop-up costume shop." "What is Halloween?" I demanded, the word feeling strange and foreign. My xenocultural advisor, a scholar who'd studied countless civilizations, began frantically searching our databases. The answer he found only deepened the mystery. "Sir, it appears to be a human holiday. They dress up in scary costumes and decorate their homes with symbols of death for entertainment. It seems to be an activity primarily for their children." A wave of pure, unfiltered bewilderment washed over me, a feeling I hadn't encountered in my entire decorated career. They have their young celebrate death like it's a game? That's what the data suggests, Admiral. They also pay money to go to attractions called haunted houses, where other humans deliberately try to scare them in a safe setting. They seem to find this fun. Another officer interrupted. "Sir, Captain Park is on the line. He says he's prepared to deliver humanity's formal response." I straightened my uniform, trying to push aside the absurdity. This had to be a bluff, a strange coping mechanism. Some species used humor to mask their terror. Yes, that had to be the explanation. "Patch him through," I commanded. Captain Park's face filled the screen, looking much more composed than before. He was the picture of professionalism, but I could swear I saw a glimmer of amusement in his eyes. "Grand Admiral Zixth," Park started formally, "I've spoken with my superiors on Earth and we have an official answer to your ultimatum. But before we get to that, we were hoping you could clarify a cultural question for us." "Proceed," I said, my patience wearing thin. "The design of your fleet is exceptionally detailed. It's clear you put a massive amount of work into it. We just want to be sure we're on the same page about your intent. Is all of this," Park made a vague gesture, "meant to be frightening?" The question was so completely unexpected that I was speechless for a moment. Of course it's meant to be frightening. It represents the fate of all who resist the hegemony. Park gave a thoughtful nod. "Right. Okay. Grand Admiral, I think we're having a slight cultural disconnect. You see, humans, We tend to react a little differently to scary imagery and intimidation tactics than you might expect. He gave a command, and new pictures flashed across the screen, showing human children dressed in skeleton pajamas, holding sacks overflowing with candy. There were images of houses decorated with fake tombstones and cheerful-looking ghosts. Then, videos of people screaming with laughter as they were chased through dark corridors by actors in monster outfits. This, Park explained with a gentle tone, is Halloween. It's one of our most popular holidays. We use skulls and skeletons for party decor. We go out of our way to find things that will scare us, because we think it's fun when we know it's not a real threat. More images popped up, posters for horror movies called Alien Invasion and Space Monsters, book covers featuring horrifying aliens, and ads for theme parks with giant, elaborate monster statues. We have entire billion-dollar industries dedicated to creating scary things just to entertain ourselves, Park went on. For us, when something tries this hard to look scary, our brain doesn't see it as a threat. It sees a familiar pattern, assumes it's fake, and the result is usually, well, we find it kind of funny. I stared, my mind racing to comprehend what he was saying. Are you telling me that our fleet, a design perfected over 50,000 years of galactic conquest, looks like a theme park to you? Park's expression softened into what looked like actual sympathy. I'm saying it's a cultural blind spot for us, Admiral. We get what you were going for. But the fact that we can see you trying so hard to be intimidating tells us you're probably not the real deal. Truly dangerous things don't need costumes. They just are. All around the bridge of my flagship, my officers looked at one another in complete disbelief. Our ultimate weapon, the psychological warfare protocol that had cowed hundreds of planets into submission without a single shot, was completely ineffective. It was a joke to these bizarre primates who had somehow managed to turn fear itself into a hobby. Something inside me finally broke. It wasn't confusion anymore. It was white-hot fury mixed with a profound, burning humiliation. Enough! My voice boomed across the command deck. If they won't fear our appearance, they will fear our firepower. Activate all weapon systems. We will give them a real reason to be afraid. Across the entire hegemony fleet, weapons of awesome power were brought online. Planet-shattering siege cannons emerged from their armored shells. Bays of antimatter torpedoes hissed open, revealing warheads that could turn a star system to dust. Quantum destabilizers, designed to rip holes in the very fabric of space-time, began to hum with energy. Target their nearest moon, I roared. Let's see if the humans find this entertaining. The fleet fired in perfect unison. The moon, a silent witness to billions of years of history, simply vanished. The siege cannons cracked it into 1,000,000 pieces. The antimatter warheads vaporized the debris. The quantum destabilizers wiped the remaining dust from existence, leaving nothing but empty space where a world had once spun. Again, I bellowed, target the asteroid belt. A terrifying series of demonstrations followed, each one showcasing a different, horrifying aspect of the hegemony's military might. It was a spectacle of absolute power that would have brought any other species in the galaxy to its knees, begging for mercy. On the human ships, however, a very different conversation was happening. The response was not at all what I expected. "Whoa, did you see the containment field on that antimatter warhead?" yelled an engineer over an open channel. "That magnetic bottle is light years ahead of our current designs." "Never mind that. Get a sensor lock on their quantum destabilizer," another voice shouted back, crackling with excitement. "They're using a cascading effect to peel back layers of reality. I need to get this data to the labs on Earth." "Don't worry. I'm recording everything in high res," a third voice said calmly. "This is the single greatest weapons demonstration our military has ever seen, and the best part is, we're not even paying for it. We're getting perfect specs on their entire arsenal." I listened to the intercepted transmissions, my mouth hanging open. They weren't scared. They were thrilled. They were treating my apocalypse-grade weaponry like a free masterclass, taking notes with the intense focus of graduate students. "Explain this!" I snarled at my xenocultural advisor. The poor man was sweating profusely as he sifted through the new information. Admiral, it appears that humans have a cultural fixation on something called reverse engineering. Their entire technological history is built on looking at a complex piece of machinery and immediately wanting to take it apart to see how it works. All intelligent species do that, I snapped. Yes, Admiral, but with humans, it's like a national sport, a puzzle. Seeing superior technology doesn't make them feel inferior. It makes them excited to figure it out and build an even better version. Their first faster-than-light drive was invented because they observed a natural anomaly and just worked backward from the results. At that moment, another officer approached, his face pale. Sir, we're getting official hails from 3 different human science stations. They're asking if we have any unexploded munitions they could acquire for research purposes. They want to study our weapons, Admiral. They're asking for free samples. This was meant to be a terrifying display of overwhelming power, the same shock and awe campaign that had subjugated 1,000 worlds. So why in the galaxy was Grand Admiral Zixth suddenly running a technical support hotline? A message flashed on my main viewer. It said, "The antimatter containment field you demonstrated could solve several key engineering problems we're currently facing. Is it possible to examine an intact unit?" Before I could even begin to process the sheer nerve, Captain Park's face appeared on my screen again, looking almost apologetic. "Grand Admiral," he said, "my apologies for the enthusiasm of our science teams. Your weapons test was, shall we say, very impressive from a technical perspective. But I've been asked to explain another little quirk of human psychology that might help clear things up." I just stared at him, utterly defeated. This insolent human had somehow turned my ultimatum into a university seminar. You see, our xenobiologists have a name for humanity. Persistence predators, Park began, his voice calm and educational, like a favorite professor. We grew up on a world that was, and I'm being completely serious here, actively trying to kill us. We have superstorms that can literally scrape cities off the continent, animals specifically evolved to hunt things our size, and plagues that change faster than we can find cures. Our planet has disasters that can rewrite the map overnight. Behind him, images flickered onto the main screen, a view of Earth, a colossal hurricane churning over an ocean, a volcano vomiting enough ash to choke the sun, the very ground splitting open in a quake, and floodwaters swallowing nations whole. It was a planet of gorgeous, terrifying violence. To live through that, Park said, you have to develop a certain way of thinking. An obstacle isn't a stop sign, it's just a problem you haven't solved yet. When we see something huge and dangerous, our first instinct isn't to run, he continued. It's to figure out how it ticks, pull it apart, and learn how to beat it. New images filled the screen, this time from human history. People climbing the highest, deadliest mountains on the planet just for the bragging rights. People diving to the absolute deepest part of the ocean just to see what was there. People strapping themselves to rockets, basically controlled bombs, and aiming for the moon long before they knew if they'd survive, all because they just had to know. We also got really good at spotting a real threat, Park added, things that just make a lot of noise and put on a big light show. They don't really ping our danger sense. On Earth, the things that will actually get you killed don't waste energy trying to look scary. A tiger doesn't roar before it pounces. A tsunami doesn't fire a warning shot, Park finished. Real danger doesn't announce itself. A cold, heavy feeling started to pool in Zixth's stomach. Are you implying that our display of force proves we're not a credible threat? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I'm implying, Park answered, choosing his words with care, that your display proves you'd rather not get into a real fight. Species that are genuinely bent on destruction don't show off their toys first. They just open fire. He let that thought hang in the air. Your big, fancy parade tells us you think a war would be expensive, even for you. Zixth's Peltherin advisor began to nod his head slowly. He's right, Admiral. Our entire military doctrine is built on forcing a surrender because actual warfare is messy and costly. We simply have never met a species that saw through the bluff so quickly, the advisor admitted quietly. And one last thing, Park went on. Humans have been the top predator on our planet for hundreds of thousands of years. We're used to being the most dangerous thing in the room, so when we see a massive show of power, it doesn't make us afraid. It makes us curious, and it gets our strategists thinking. Right on cue, a new human broadcast was intercepted and put on the main screen. It was a feed from a military planning room. Human officers were calmly discussing how to engage Zixth's fleet. They weren't talking about how to survive or escape, they were breaking down how to win. Their main siege cannons have a charge time of about 40 seconds, going by those energy readings, one analyst said, his voice completely level. That gives us a big enough window to get in close and hit their weapon emitters directly. Another voice chimed in. The antimatter torpedoes are nasty, but they're slow. Our point defense cannons should be able to shoot down most of them if we keep at the perfect range. The quantum destabilizers are the real problem, a third officer pointed out, but it looks like they need a coordinated shot from several ships to work. If we can break up their formation, we can make that whole weapon system pretty much useless. A wave of absolute dread washed over Zixth. The humans weren't scared of his power. They were reverse engineering it, picking it apart, looking for its weak spots. While his grand fleet was striking poses, the humans were calmly planning a war like it was just another Tuesday. Captain Park, Zix said, his voice almost inaudible. Are you telling me that none of what we've shown you has scared you in the slightest? Park genuinely seemed to think about it for a second. Your technology is amazing, Grand Admiral. Your weapons are powerful, and your fleet is gigantic. But no, we're not afraid. If you were really going to destroy us, you'd have done it already. Instead, you're talking. And talking means you want something, which means we have room to negotiate. The comms channel went dead. Zixth stood on the bridge of his flagship, a 50,000-year-old military strategy built on fear, completely taken apart by a species that had just barely learned to leave its own solar system. He was now facing a choice he had never once had to take seriously, starting a real war with an enemy that refused to be scared. It would be bloody, it would be expensive, and if word got out that the hegemony's bark was worse than its bite, other races across the galaxy might start getting brave. But before he could even think of an order, every alarm on every single ship in both fleets started screaming at once. "Admiral!" his sensor officer shrieked, all four of his arms a blur over the consoles. "Dark space tear! We've got multiple signatures coming out at the edge of the system!" On the main view screen, space itself looked like it was being ripped open, and through these bleeding gashes in reality, something ancient and truly awful began to crawl its way into being. Zixth's blood ran cold. He knew those energy readings. "The Zilth," he whispered. They were the galaxy's real monsters. The Zilth didn't conquer. They were a plague, a cosmic infection that wiped the galaxy clean every few hundred years. Their ships weren't built. They were grown, horrible, living nightmares that fed on life itself. They didn't talk. They didn't make threats. They just ate. They would strip entire sectors of every living thing, leaving behind nothing but a graveyard of silent dead worlds. The Zilth fleet was smaller than the hegemonies, but that didn't matter at all. Their ships were twisted, throbbing horrors of organic tissue. There was no art to their look, no posturing, no shows of intimidation. They were pure, deadly function. "All ships, defensive formations!" Zixth yelled, his voice cracking with a fear that was suddenly very, very real. "Get ready for an emergency jump!" Across his fleet, order fell apart. You couldn't bully this species. This was the monster that even other monsters ran from. But on the human ships, the reaction was shockingly different. Captain Park's voice cut through the terrified chatter, no longer sounding like a professor, but sharp as a razor's edge. "All human ships, execute combat formation Delta. Bring all weapons to full power. I want targeting solutions on those hostiles, now!" Zixth stared in total shock as the small human fleet, instead of running, pulled their formation tighter and charged forward. They were intentionally putting themselves between the Zilth and Zixth's own panicked fleet. "Captain Park," Zixth screamed into his comms, "you have no idea what you're doing. You can't fight them. You can't reason with them. Your only chance is to run." Park's face appeared on his screen, and the look in his eyes was colder and more terrifying than the Zilth. The friendly teacher was gone. In his place was a man with eyes like solid steel, with absolutely no fear in them. "We know exactly what they are, Admiral," Park said, his voice dangerously quiet. "We've met them before. 3 years ago, one of their little hunting parties tried to harvest one of our colonies in the outer system." He paused just long enough for it to sink in. "We killed every last one of them." "That's impossible," Zixth stammered. "Nobody fights the Zilth and lives." "We," Park snapped back, "are not nobody. To all hegemony ships, we're sending our tactical data to your network right now. Their organic hulls are tough against energy weapons, but they're weak to kinetic strikes. Their regeneration cores are right here, here, and here," Park ordered, as a flood of targeting data poured into the hegemony systems. "If you want to get out of this system alive, you will do exactly as we say." The Zilth fleet moved in, a silent, sickening wave of cosmic hunger. It didn't care if a ship was human or hegemony. To them, it was all just food. "Admiral," his tactical officer said, his voice choked with awe, "the human ships. They're moving to block them. They're using their own fleet as a shield for us." Zixth was completely baffled by what he was watching. The very species they came here to push around, the creatures they had written off as weak little prey, were now actively protecting his own fleet from guaranteed destruction. It went against every rule of galactic power he had ever learned. The Zilth shot first. Huge globs of bioplasma, a glowing acid that could melt standard shields, flew toward the human ships. The humans didn't even try to swerve. Their shields lit up like tiny stars, taking the hits, and they fired back instantly. Human weapons were nothing like the hegemony's fancy technology. While the hegemony used elegant energy beams and complex particle torpedoes, the human weapons were brutal and beautiful in their simplicity. The weapons they used were unlike anything we'd ever seen. Accelerators that flung solid slugs at nearly the speed of light, and missiles so packed with kinetic energy they didn't need to explode. They just tore through anything they hit. The very first Zilth ship to get struck by a human railgun didn't just blow apart, it literally split down the middle. Its living hull, which was designed to regenerate from laser fire and plasma scoring, had absolutely no defense against a giant metal brick punching through its core. They actually know how to kill them," Zixth's tactical officer whispered, his voice filled with utter shock. "The humans know how to fight the Zilth." Right then, a voice cut through the noise on an open channel, a voice that every single ship in both fleets could hear. It was Captain Park, and his tone was as cool and steady as a surgeon's hand, the voice of a man who had clearly done this 100 times before. "Human fleet, execute pattern Gamma. Hegemony ships, if you want to help, focus your fire on the targets we've already cracked open. Don't waste your energy making new holes. Just shoot at the weak spots we're creating for you." One of Zixth's junior officers turned to him, his eyes shining with a sudden, desperate hope. "Admiral, your orders?" In that one moment, Admiral Zixth made a call that would have been completely unthinkable just an hour earlier. "All ships, you heard the human. Follow his lead. Pour every ounce of firepower you have exactly where he tells you to. We fight with them or we all die." The hegemony fleet, which moments ago was an intimidating, conquering force, suddenly scrambled into new positions, trying to fall in line alongside the human vessels. It was a messy, clumsy dance between two navies that had never even met, trying to find their rhythm in the middle of a slaughter. But the humans were incredibly quick, shifting their own formations instantly to cover the hegemony's weak points and boost their strengths. A gigantic Zilth harvester ship zeroed in on a hegemony dreadnought, its grotesque biological arms reaching out to literally chew the vessel apart. Before those tendrils could even touch the ship's armor, 3 human vessels swarmed it like a pack of wolves, their weapons tearing into the organic beast with a cold, terrifying precision. "Hegemony Dreadnought Valor's call. Fall back and get your shields back up," Park's voice commanded over the comms. "We've got this." All Zixth could do was watch as the humans fought with a ferocity he had never seen before. They weren't fighting for honor or to make a statement. They were fighting to wipe out a plague. Their ships took hits that would have sent his own crews running for their lives, but the humans just pushed forward. When their shields went down, they didn't retreat. They just kept firing. When their hulls were ripped open to the cold vacuum of space, they simply rerouted power from life support systems to keep the guns blazing. He watched in a mixture of horror and amazement as one human cruiser, its entire left side a glowing wreck of molten metal, deliberately rammed a Zilth harvester. The resulting explosion destroyed them both, but it shattered the Zilth formation just long enough for a wave of human ships to charge into the breach. "Captain Park's ship is taking heavy fire," one of Zixth's officers shouted. "His shields are down to 15%. Zixth glanced at his tactical display. Park's vessel, the very diplomatic ship that had started this entire mess, was holding the most critical point in the battle, intentionally drawing fire from 3 Zilth cruisers so a crippled hegemony battleship could escape. "All ships within range," Zixth bellowed, his voice echoing across his bridge. "Focus all fire on the Zilth ships targeting Captain Park, now!" The hegemony fleet responded instantly. Dozens of warships unleashed a tidal wave of energy beams and torpedoes at the ships threatening the human captain. The storm of firepower slammed into targets that had already been weakened and fractured by human railguns. The joint attack was simply too much. The Zilth, now facing a unified enemy fighting with a shocking level of ferocity and losing ships faster than they could count, finally broke. Their disgusting living vessels turned and fled, slithering back toward the dark rifts in space they had emerged from, off to find an easier target somewhere else in the cosmos. As the last Zilth ship disappeared, a deep, weary silence settled over the two fleets. The human ships were battered. Some were nothing but floating wreckage, but they had not broken. In fact, they had just rescued the very fleet that had come to subjugate them. Zixth opened a private channel to Captain Park. The human's face appeared on the screen. His uniform was torn, his face was streaked with soot, and the bridge behind him was a disaster of sparking consoles and frantic activity. "Captain Park," Zixth started, choosing his words with great care. "You risked everything, your ships, your crews, to save us. Why?" Park looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but his gaze was unwavering. "Because the Zilth were the real enemy here, Admiral. You're just an expanding empire. That's just politics. The Zilth wipe entire species out of existence. That's genocide. We know the difference. Your people fight with a savagery I couldn't have imagined," Zixth confessed. "You saw our fleet, you heard our demands for your surrender, and you laughed at us. You figured we weren't a real threat," Park countered. "But humanity learned a long, long time ago that the creatures who try the hardest to look intimidating are almost never the ones you actually have to worry about. The Zilth don't make threats. They don't posture. They just appear and start killing everyone. That's what a real monster looks like. And that's when we stop laughing." As the human ships began emergency repairs right there in the void, the hegemony fleet simply drifted, their crews in a state of shock. The mission to intimidate humanity was a complete and utter failure, but something much more important had been forged in that battle. It was respect, and it was earned with blood and sacrifice. Grand Admiral Zixth sat in his command chair, re-watching the battle recordings for the third time. What he saw defied every principle of space combat he had ever learned. The humans weren't just skilled. They fought with a brutal, relentless determination that was almost disturbing. When their shields failed, they relied on their armor. When their armor was torn away, they used their own mangled ships as weapons. When things looked hopeless, they simply found a new way to attack even harder. But it wasn't just blind rage. Every single move was calculated. Every sacrifice had a clear purpose. The humans fought as if this was just another day at the office for them, against an enemy that made his own powerful fleet look like a joke. "Admiral," his xenocultural advisor interrupted his thoughts, his voice quiet. "I've done a more thorough search of human military history. I strongly suggest you see this." The scholar brought up data that revealed a truly chilling reality. Humanity's entire history was a single, non-stop war. Not just against other species, but against their own planet, against plagues, and most of all, against each other. "Humans have been fighting for their entire existence," the advisor said, his voice shaking just a little. "Not like us, with the rare border skirmish. I mean constant, unending conflict. For humanity, peace is the brief pause between wars. War is their default state." Zixth watched clips from Earth's history, empires rising and collapsing in fire, new technologies created for the sole purpose of killing more people in more effective ways, entire societies built around the concept of glorious battle. Even their art and their stories were saturated with it. "But that's not the most frightening part," the advisor continued. "They are, at the same time, the most fiercely competitive and the most profoundly cooperative species we've ever cataloged. They'll slaughter each other over a small piece of land one day, and then unite as a single, unstoppable force to fight a common enemy the next. They have these social constructs called armies, massive organizations devoted to nothing but the practice of coordinated violence. Most species evolve beyond such primitive concepts before they even discover space travel," Zixth whispered. "Exactly. Most species figure out how to cooperate first, and then they build starships. Humans built starships so they could have bigger wars. They are an apex predator that developed intelligence but never lost its predatory instincts." Captain Park's face suddenly appeared on the main screen, cutting the briefing short. He looked refreshed now, wearing a clean uniform, but his expression was no less serious. "Grand Admiral, I believe it's time we discussed what happens next." Zixth sat up straighter in his chair. "I agree. The original reason for my visit has become, well, complicated." "That's one way of saying it," Park replied. The edge of his mouth pulled into a faint smile that didn't quite reach his exhausted eyes. "You came here to strong-arm us into joining your empire. We laughed at you, and then we saved your entire fleet from being wiped out. I have a feeling this scenario isn't covered in your standard first contact manual." "No, Captain, it is not," Zixth admitted. "To be completely honest, I have no idea what to do now. My mission is a failure, but the Hegemony Council will still demand a report." Park nodded slowly. "Then let me tell you something about humans that your files probably missed. We didn't laugh because we thought you were weak. We laughed because trying to scare us is like trying to intimidate a great white shark by splashing water at it." "I'm starting to get that," Zixth admitted, his voice tight. "But you're not getting the why," Captain Park replied, his tone surprisingly relaxed. "Look, for hundreds of thousands of years, humans were basically lunch meat on a planet that had 1,000 ways to kill us. We got really, really good at telling the difference between something that's just making a lot of noise and something that's actually about to eat you. See, Admiral, real predators don't roar before they pounce. True danger doesn't flicker a bunch of lights to tell you it's coming. The way you guys showed up, it told our instincts you weren't an immediate threat, so we could afford to be entertained." "And the Zilth?" Zixth pressed. Park's friendly expression evaporated. "The Zilth are a real threat. They don't give speeches, they don't posture, they just consume. When their scouts found one of our colonies 3 years ago, they attacked without saying a single word. They murdered 80,000 of my people before we even knew we were at war. We had to learn how to fight them because we didn't have a choice," Park said, his face like granite. "We tracked their scouts back to their forward base and wiped it off the star map. We hunted down every last Zilth ship in this sector and took them apart. We didn't do it for kicks. We did it because we knew if even one ship got away, they would just come back to kill more of our families." "That kind of aggression against the Zilth is unprecedented," Zixth murmured. "Is it? Or maybe most species just never had to claw their way to the top of the food chain to survive?" Park leaned in a little. "Admiral, let me tell you what a human is. We're persistence predators. We evolved to literally run our prey to death, to chase it until its heart gave out. We're pack hunters who came up with complex, coordinated tactics. We're tool makers who were chipping flint for spearheads long before we figured out how to plant a seed. But more than anything, we are survivors. We have dragged ourselves through one apocalypse after another and simply refused to lie down and die. He pointed to the view screen, which showed the battered but unbroken human ships. You just watched us tangle with the Zilth. That's what happens when we stop being amused and get serious. We don't fight to look tough. We don't fight for glory. We fight to win. And we don't stop until the fight is over, one way or another. A shiver went down Zixth's primary nerve column. You're saying your entire species is violent? Not at all, Park said, his voice firm. I'm saying we're survivors. Violence is just one of the tools in our box, and we only use it when we have to. But you need to understand this about us. We would much rather cooperate than fight. We'd rather build a bridge than burn one. We will always, always choose peace if it's a genuine option. But, Zixth prompted, sensing the unspoken word hanging between them. But when peace isn't on the table, when our people are in danger, or when we've given our word to protect an ally, we are very, very good at violence. Because as a species, we've been practicing for our entire existence. Park stood, his casual posture shifting to something more formal. So, Grand Admiral, here is humanity's official response to your ultimatum. We will not bow to the hegemony. We reject your authority over our worlds. However, we are more than willing to open diplomatic channels, sign trade agreements, and form an alliance for mutual defense. What just happened out here proves we can be damned good friends to have when things get hairy. The Council will never agree to that, Zixth said, but the certainty was gone from his voice. The Council will agree to whatever you recommend, Park countered. You're the Grand Admiral. You have the authority to negotiate, and I think, if you're being honest with yourself, you know that trying to force humanity to its knees would cost you a hell of a lot more than you'd ever gain by making us your friends. Zixth thought about it. He replayed the battle, the way the human ships had moved to shield his own flagship, even after he'd threatened to annihilate them. He thought about the cold, efficient way they had taken apart the Zilth fleet, and the deeply unsettling realization that if humanity ever turned that kind of focus on the hegemony, it would be a catastrophe. What you're proposing has never been done, he said finally. No species has ever told the hegemony no and been allowed to stay independent. Then we'll be the first, Park said with a simple shrug. Admiral, you came here with a fleet designed to put the fear of God in us. You put on a light show meant to make us shake in our boots. But humans don't get scared by shows of force. We respect capability, and that has to be proven with actions, not with threats. And today, we proved our capability, Zixth said slowly, the idea taking root. Yes, you did. You fought surprisingly well with us. Your ships, while obviously built more for show than for a real fight, were still useful when you used them right. Your crews adapted to a chaotic situation with incredible speed. Your actions earned our respect. Park smiled, and this time it was a genuine smile that reached his eyes. See? That's the difference. Respect builds bridges. Fear just builds resentment, and down the line, rebellion. You can't hold an empire of 1,000 worlds together by scaring everyone into submission. Sooner or later, someone's going to call your bluff, and if your scare tactics are all you've got, you have no plan B. You want us to completely change our entire expansion strategy. Zixth said, what I'm suggesting is that you've already started. We won't be your subjects, but we will be your partners. We'll share tech, coordinate our defenses, open up trade, and help you keep this corner of the galaxy safe from real threats like the Zilth. But we do it as equals. Zixth made a choice right then and there, one that could get him stripped of his command, but might just save billions of lives. I will take your proposal to the Council, a new path for the hegemony. Species who prove they can contribute to our collective security will be offered a partnership, not conquest. They might shoot it down, Park warned. They might, but today taught me something important. Humanity won't be the last species that isn't impressed by your fireworks. Your psychology is different, but it can't be one of a kind. Eventually, the hegemony will run into another species that doesn't react to being threatened the way we expect. It's better to have a diplomatic option ready before we accidentally kick a hornet's nest we can't handle. That's a smart way to look at it, Admiral, Park conceded. Just as Zixth was about to cut the connection, his communications officer spoke up. Admiral, one of our intelligence analysts has a strange question about human culture. Put it through. Sir, he wants to know if humans find our threat displays amusing because they look like they're Halloween decorations, and Halloween is a holiday where they deliberately try to scare each other for fun. Does that mean the humans actually enjoyed being threatened by us? A very long, very awkward silence filled the comm channel. Then, from the human flagship, came the very sound that had started this whole bizarre day. Captain Park was laughing again. Admiral, Park said, gasping for air, let me be crystal clear. We weren't laughing because we enjoyed the threat. We were laughing because your threat wasn't threatening. It was like watching a little kid hide behind a curtain with their feet sticking out, then jump out and yell boo. It's funny because it's trying so hard to be scary and failing so completely. So if we had just attacked you without any warning or display, Zixth asked. Park's laughter stopped on a dime. His face went dead serious. Then we wouldn't have had time to laugh. We would have been too busy fighting for our lives. And that, Admiral, is the whole point. Things that are truly dangerous don't need to put on a show. They just act. The human ships began to move, setting a course back to their own territory. The hegemony fleet floated in the void, watching them leave, no longer sure if they had just met the harmless prey they came to conquer or the apex predator they should have been trying to befriend all along. On the bridge of the flagship, a young officer turned to his commander. Admiral, what are we going to tell the Council? Zixth watched the human ships vanish into hyperspace, thinking about a species that made a game out of fear, that fought with terrifying precision and was somehow both comical and deeply horrifying at the same time. We're going to tell them the truth, he said finally. We found a species that is immune to our intimidation tactics. We tried to scare them. They laughed at us. Then we fought a common enemy, and they turned out to be the most capable allies we've ever seen. We will also report that humanity has refused to be our subjects, but has offered an alliance between equals. And if the Council says no and orders an attack anyway, the officer asked in a hushed tone. Zixth remembered the human ships shielding his own. He remembered their cold, brutal efficiency in battle. And he remembered Captain Park's promise to fight until you win, or until you're all dead. Then we will inform the Council that such a war would be long, bloody, and unwinnable because humans do not surrender. As his own ship limped away from human space, Zixth finally opened the intelligence file on the human holiday they called Halloween. He saw pictures of little kids dressed up like monsters, smiling and laughing. He saw adults covering their houses in fake skeletons and cobwebs just for a party. And in that moment, he understood everything. Humans hadn't just defeated their fears. They had tamed them. They had taken the galaxy's most powerful weapon of control, fear itself, and turned it into a children's game. You can't threaten a species like that. You can only learn to respect them. And Zixth was just starting to understand that respect was a currency far more valuable than fear ever was. Ever heard the phrase, kicking a man when he's down? For the mighty Croc Empire, that wasn't just a saying. It was practically their mission statement. From the bridge of his warship, the Crimson Fang, Commander Zethor watched as the very last defense satellite of a Valian colony disappeared in a silent puff of cosmic dust. He crossed his massive arms, a deep sense of satisfaction warming his chest. Another world broken, another jewel for the Emperor's crown. His second-in-command's voice swelled with pride. That makes 47 systems, sir. The Valian resistance crumbled in just 6 hours. Zethor clicked his mandibles together, the crosh equivalent of a dry laugh. 6 hours. He was almost impressed. The Valians had guts, he'd give them that, but guts don't do much against plasma cannons. After steamrolling their way across the galaxy for 3 centuries, the Croc Empire ran on one simple philosophy. The only thing anyone understands is overwhelming force. Just then, a crisp chime echoed from the communications desk. It was a top priority message from High Command. Zethor sauntered over, expecting orders to go flatten some other poor, ambitious species that had dared to reach for the stars. But the text on the screen made him pause. A new species had just wandered into their corner of the galaxy. Their designation was human. They came from the third planet of some boring yellow star. Their technology was a complete joke, basic fusion drives, simple energy weapons, and he had to read this part twice. Absolutely no shields detected on their ships. The final analysis was blunt. They were no threat whatsoever. This was going to be a walk in the park. The images that loaded onto his screen were so ridiculous, he nearly snorted. Human ships were clunky, ugly boxes that looked more like museum pieces than interstellar vessels. The official report figured their tech was at least 500 years behind Croc standards. "Commander," his weapons officer called out, "we've got new orders." "Don't tell me," Zethor sighed with theatrical boredom. "They want us to go conquer these humans." "Yes, sir. In fact, they're calling it a training exercise for the junior officers. High Command expects us to have all human colonies secured in a matter of hours." A training exercise. Zethor couldn't believe it. He'd been hoping for a real challenge, but an order was an order. And hey, bagging another conquered species would certainly look good on his next performance review. "Set a course for their nearest colony," he commanded. "What's this one called?" "New Edinburgh, Commander. Population of about 3 million. Their defenses are, laughable. Just a few small platforms in orbit. They have no real fleet to speak of." 3 million souls. Zethor didn't even blink. "We'll give them one chance to surrender. When they say no, we'll blast their orbital junk into atoms and send down the ground troops. Do it by the book." His massive fleet of 200 warships shifted as one, tearing open a hole in space-time as they jumped to faster than light. The trip would take 3 days, which Zethor spent poring over the intel on these humans. They came from a high-gravity world with a single large moon they called Earth. They had basically just figured out how to travel between stars. Their ships were slow, and their weapons were primitive. The reports showed they'd hastily set up 7 colonies in nearby systems, and every single one was a sitting duck. "They expanded way too fast," his tactical officer noted, tapping at the star chart. "They're spread incredibly thin. It's a classic rookie mistake." "Every young species makes it," Zethor said with the air of a wise old teacher. "They invent an FTL drive and suddenly they think the galaxy is their oyster. Then they run into someone like us and they learn the hard way. The galaxy doesn't belong to the bold, it belongs to the strong." On the 3rd day, the fleet dropped out of hyperspace right on New Edinburgh's doorstep. "Full sensor sweep now," Zethor ordered. The colony was even more pathetic up close than the files suggested. One barely hospitable planet, a couple of trading stations, and a handful of tiny patrol ships that looked like they'd lose a fight with an asteroid. "Open a channel," Zethor barked. "Broadcast on all frequencies." His comms officer gave a sharp nod. "Channel is hot, Commander." Zethor's voice, translated into the galactic common tongue, boomed across the system. "Attention, human colony of New Edinburgh. This is Commander Zethor of the Croc Empire. You are trespassing in our sovereign territory. You have one of your hours to surrender unconditionally. Fail to comply, and we will utterly annihilate your orbital infrastructure and begin a ground occupation." "You will not receive a second warning." He snapped the connection and leaned back in his command chair waiting. Newbies always reacted in one of 3 ways. They folded immediately, they begged for mercy, or they put up a pointless, heroic fight. 5 minutes ticked by. Then a voice crackled over their speakers. "Commander Zethor, this is Governor Chen of New Edinburgh." The voice was human, male, and sounded weirdly calm. "We have received your ultimatum. I feel it's only fair to inform you that this colony is under the protection of the Terran Colonial Navy. I strongly advise you to turn your fleet around and avoid any unnecessary bloodshed. Please, consider your next move very carefully." Zethor's mandibles clicked together in a loud, clattering laugh. Unnecessary bloodshed? The little human was talking as if he had a choice in the matter, as if his pathetic little pop guns could do anything against 200 top-of-the-line warships. "Sir, the human is refusing to stand down," his second-in-command stated, pointing out the obvious. "Then we proceed as planned," Zethor replied, his voice turning to ice. "Target their orbital stations, turn them into dust, but leave the planet alone for now. Once they see their shields in the sky evaporate, they'll sing a different tune." The fleet surged forward like a great armored beast. It was a brutal ballet the Croc had performed hundreds of times. Honestly, it was getting a little boring. The human platforms fired first, sending a volley of primitive missiles their way. The projectiles splashed against the Croc shields like raindrops on a window. In return, 50 of Zethor's ships unleashed their plasma cannons in one perfectly synchronized blast. The orbital stations simply vanished, replaced by silent, expanding balls of superheated gas. But then, something felt wrong. "Commander," the sensor officer reported, his voice tight with confusion. "The civilian ships are evacuating the stations, but they're not panicking. They're moving in perfect formations. There's no chaos, sir. None at all." Zethor leaned forward, narrowing his eyes at the display. The officer was right. The human ships were pulling back with the kind of discipline you'd expect from a fleet of veterans. Where was the fear? Where was the screaming? "They aren't fighting back," his weapons officer noted. "But they're not surrendering either," Zethor muttered, a tiny seed of unease planting itself in his gut. "Keep firing. They'll break." At that very second, the sensor officer shot out of his chair. "Commander, new contact! It's coming from behind the planet's moon. It's a single ship, but the size. Commander, it's enormous. It has 3 times the mass of our flagship." Zethor's head whipped around to the main view screen. A single colossal shadow was gliding out from behind the moon. As it came into the light, every sensor on the bridge went haywire. Its hull was forged from some unknown non-reflective alloy. Its energy signature was literally off the charts. And for something so gigantic, it moved with a silent, deadly grace. "That can't be a human ship," his tactical officer breathed, his voice filled with awe. But as it drew closer, a crisp, clear signal cut through the static, identifying the vessel in both the human language and galactic common TCNS Indomitable, Terran Colonial Navy, Destroyer Class. Destroyer Class? Zethor's mind reeled. If they called a ship that massive a destroyer, what in the stars did they call a battleship? For the very first time in his long, decorated career, Commander Zethor felt a cold, unfamiliar sensation creep up his spine. It was called fear. The human warship moved like a shark circling its prey. Its hull was a deep, matte black that seemed to swallow the light. The entire ship was a collection of sharp, lethal angles, bristling with weapon emplacements that looked far too large to be real. "Get me a full sensor scan on that ship, now!" Zethor demanded, trying to keep his voice from cracking under the pressure. "I want to know absolutely everything about it." His officer's fingers were a blur over the console. "Commander, our sensors can't even penetrate its hull. The material is like nothing we've ever seen. And its energy readings, they don't match any known power source in the galactic database. Sir, the output we're detecting should be physically impossible for a vessel that size." "Nothing's impossible," Zethor snapped, but the words felt hollow. "It's a single ship. We have 200. Just then, the comms channel flickered to life. A human face appeared on the view screen. It was a woman, her dark hair pulled back into a severe military-style bun. Her uniform was immaculate, and her expression was utterly calm, as if facing down a fleet of 200 warships was just another Tuesday. "Commander Zethor," she said in flawless galactic common, her voice steady and cool. "I am Captain Park of the Terran Colonial Navy ship, the Indomitable. You have launched an unprovoked attack on a colony under Terran protection. This is your first and only chance to withdraw your fleet without conflict. I strongly suggest you accept this offer." Zethor's initial fear instantly morphed into pure rage. The audacity! How dare this primitive creature speak to him as if she held all the cards? He had 200 warships. She had 1. "Captain Park," he sneered back, packing as much contempt into her lower rank as he could. I am Commander Zethor of the mighty Kroth Empire, and I don't take suggestions from a species that just learned how to crawl out of its own star system. You are outnumbered 200 to 1. I'm offering you the same deal I gave your little colony. Surrender now or face total annihilation. But Captain Park's expression didn't even twitch. There was no sign of fear, no hesitation, just a cold, professional calm that sent an unexpected chill down Zethor's spine. I understand, she replied quietly. You have made your choice. The consequences that follow are now entirely on your head. The communication link severed. Arrogant human, Zethor's second-in-command muttered beside him. She really thinks one oversized ship can challenge our entire armada. All vessels, Zethor broadcast to the fleet, his voice booming with false confidence. Target the human ship. Concentrate all firepower on my mark. We're about to give these humans a lesson in what happens when you defy the Kroth Empire. 200 warships maneuvered into perfect attack formation, their weapon systems humming with immense power. Plasma cannons whined as they spooled up to maximum charge. Missile bays slid open, revealing their deadly cargo. Every single weapon in the fleet locked onto the lone human ship. Fire! Zethor roared. The space between the fleets erupted in a blinding storm of destructive energy. Waves of plasma, laser beams, and hundreds of missiles converged on the Indomitable. It was enough firepower to crack a planet's crust, more than enough to obliterate an entire fleet of lesser ships. The assault raged for a full 30 seconds. When the brilliant light finally faded, Zethor leaned forward in his command chair, expecting to see nothing but drifting wreckage. They were all expecting to see twisted metal and the frozen bodies of the crew floating in the blackness of space. But instead, the human ship, the Indomitable, was just there, completely unharmed. 200 of the Empire's most powerful warships had just unleashed hell on it, and there wasn't a single scorch mark on its hull. Its shields hadn't even flickered. All of that power had done absolutely nothing, and if you think that's insane, you won't believe what happened next. If you're enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more. Impossible, someone whispered on the bridge. Zethor wasn't sure if it was one of his officers or his own stunned thought. Sensors, he shouted. Report. Did we miss? No, Commander, the sensor officer replied, his voice trembling. Every shot was a direct hit, but their shields, they just absorbed it. The energy just vanished into them. Our weapons had no effect at all. Zethor stared at the main view screen, his mind refusing to process what his eyes were telling him. This was impossible. No shield technology in the known galaxy could withstand that kind of punishment without at least showing signs of strain. Unless everything they thought they knew about these humans was a catastrophic lie. The comms channel crackled, and Captain Park's face filled the screen again. Her expression was unchanged. She still had that look of disappointment, like a teacher watching a student fail the simplest test. Your turn is over, she said, her voice as cold and empty as space itself. All ships, evasive maneuvers, now! Zethor screamed into the comms, a split second before realizing it was already too late. The Indomitable fired a single weapon, just one. A railgun turret on its bow glowed for a fraction of a second, launching a projectile so fast it was invisible to the naked eye. The tungsten slug crossed the vast distance between the two fleets in the blink of an eye. It slammed into Zethor's flagship, the mighty Crimson Fang, hitting it dead center. The ship's shields, the same shields that had protected them in dozens of battles, simply vanished as if they were never there. The projectile tore through the warship's reinforced hull like it was made of tissue paper. The massive ship jolted violently from the impact, then split cleanly in two, sheared down the middle by the unbelievable kinetic force. Zethor was thrown across the bridge, slamming hard against his command throne. Red alert klaxons blared. Half of his bridge crew were sucked into the vacuum of space the moment the hull was breached. Shimmering emergency force fields snapped into place, barely holding the atmosphere inside the command center. Damage report! He managed to yell over the deafening alarms. The ship is gone, Commander, his second-in-command stated, his voice hollow and defeated. We're only alive because this section is a reinforced command pod. Life support might give us a few hours. Zethor struggled to his feet and looked at the few displays that were still working. The entire rear section of his flagship was now just a mangled ruin, tumbling away with its engines cold and dark. The front half, where he stood, was dead in the water with no power. But that wasn't what turned his blood to ice. The human warship hadn't moved an inch. It was just hanging there, watching them. It could have destroyed his entire fleet with that one shot if it had aimed differently. It had the power, the pinpoint accuracy, and the technology. But it chose to fire only once. They were sending a message, a brutally clear one. The humans could have wiped them from existence in a heartbeat, but they didn't. They chose to show restraint. They chose to demonstrate their absolute superiority without resorting to a massacre. "Commander," the communications officer said weakly, "the rest of the fleet is asking for orders." Orders? What orders could he possibly give? Attack. Every last one of them had just seen what happened. Their weapons were like pea shooters, and that single human ship could dismantle them piece by piece without breaking a sweat. Retreat? That would mean admitting a crushing, humiliating defeat. It would mean the Great Croth Empire, the conquerors of 47 star systems, had been completely humbled by one ship from a species they had written off as primitives. Zethor looked at the terrified looks on the faces of his remaining crew. These were proud young warriors, brought up to believe in the divine mission of the Croth Empire. Now, their eyes were filled with nothing but pure, unadulterated fear. "All ships," he finally said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "Cease fire. I repeat, do not engage the human vessel. Put them on screen." The Indomitable remained perfectly still. A colossal predator watching its wounded prey, waiting to see if it would lash out again, waiting to see if the Croth had learned their lesson or if they needed another one. In that single, terrifying moment, Zethor understood the truth. The humans hadn't just taken their first steps out of their solar system. They had been out here for a very long time. Watching, learning, preparing, and when they finally decided to show their hand, they did it with technology so far beyond his own people that it made the entire Croth armada look like children playing with toy boats. The hunters had just become the hunted, and their own arrogance had blinded them to the danger until it was far too late. A wave of raw panic began to ripple through the Croth fleet. Zethor could hear the strained, terrified voices flooding the command channel. His captains, all of them hardened veterans of dozens of wars, now sounded like scared children. "Commander, what are your orders?" one of them pleaded, his voice breaking. "Do we attack?" another shouted frantically. "Should we try to run?" a third one begged. Zethor had no answers for them. His flagship was a wreck, his crew was dead or dying, and the human ship just waited with a terrifying patience, like a teacher giving a class a moment to reflect on their foolish mistakes. Then, some of his captains made the decision for him. 5 ships broke from formation and fled, their engines flaring to full power as they desperately tried to reach the edge of the system and jump to light speed. "What a bunch of fools," Zethor muttered under his breath. Did they honestly believe they could escape that thing? But the human ship, the Indomitable, didn't even bother to pursue. It just hung there in space, its weapons cold and silent. Captain Park was just letting them go. But why? The reason slammed into Zethor's mind like a physical shock. She was letting them escape to be messengers. The humans wanted an audience. They wanted the entire galaxy to know this story. Fueled by a deadly cocktail of pride and desperation, other captains decided to fight. 30 warships surged ahead, gunning their engines toward the human vessel, their weapons blazing in a frantic, disorganized barrage. A storm of plasma, energy bolts, and missiles once again lit up the void between the fleets. The Indomitable finally began to move. It didn't try to evade or dodge. It simply pushed forward, its shields absorbing every single attack without so much as a flicker. Then it returned fire, but not with the colossal railgun that had crippled Zethor's own command ship. This time, it used its smaller systems, point defense turrets that locked onto each enemy ship with a terrifying precision. Laser batteries fired in a rapid volley, each shot placed perfectly to disable, not to destroy. The first Croth warship's engines exploded in a fountain of sparks. The second had its weapon arrays melted into useless lumps of metal. The third started to spin wildly as its maneuvering thrusters were neatly blown off its hull. One after another, the charging warships were taken apart with surgical skill. In less than 3 minutes, 30 warships were floating dead in space. Not a single ship was destroyed. Their crews were all alive, but they were utterly powerless, drifting like discarded toys. "By the spirits of our fathers," Zethor's second-in-command whispered, his voice filled with awe. "They're not even breaking a sweat." And that was the most horrifying part. The human vessel moved with a casual grace, as if it were simply brushing away a cloud of pesky gnats. There was no sense of urgency, no hint of effort, nothing to suggest this battle was anything more than target practice for them. Zethor fought through the pain and shame, forcing his mind to work. He recalled every intelligence report he'd ever seen on the humans, their primitive fusion drives, their crude kinetic weapons, their complete lack of modern shielding. Every single report had been a lie. How could this have happened? The Croc had one of the finest intelligence networks in the known galaxy. They had been observing the humans for months before launching what was supposed to be an easy invasion, analyzing every nut and bolt of their ships. So how in the cosmos did they get it so wrong? As his own flagship groaned around him, the answer hit Zethor, and it was 1,000 times more terrifying than he could have imagined. The humans hadn't made a mistake. They let the Crocs see precisely what they wanted them to see. Those clunky ships, that outdated technology, the paper-thin defenses. It was all a show. A massive, galaxy-spanning act. But for what? It was a test. The humans had been watching the Croc just as carefully, waiting for them to reveal their true character. And the second they attacked that helpless colony, the humans revealed theirs. "They were baiting us," Zethor whispered, the words getting stuck in his throat. "They knew we'd come." "What are you talking about, Commander?" his first mate asked, his voice trembling. "The humans," Zethor said, his own voice heavy with the awful realization. "They've been out here a lot longer than we thought. Way longer. They saw us conquer other species. They analyzed our strategies, our weapons, our very soul. They knew we'd see them as an easy target. They knew we'd attack, and they orchestrated this whole entire thing." It made a sick kind of sense. The humans didn't just stumble onto the galactic scene when they finally figured out faster-than-light travel. They arrived because they decided to. They hadn't built their fleet to fight the current powers of the galaxy. They built it to fight any enemy that might ever appear, even threats that didn't exist yet. And in doing that, they had become stronger than anything that did exist. The communications console flickered back on one last time. Captain Park's face appeared, and for the first time Zethor felt like he was truly seeing her. She was young for a captain, probably not even 40 in his years, but her eyes held the heavy wisdom of someone who had seen true war. Not the simple conquests the Croc were used to, but bloody, desperate fights for survival. "Commander Zethor," she began, her voice calm and solid as a rock, "I'm going to explain a few things to you. I suggest you listen very, very closely, because your life and the lives of your remaining crew depend on you understanding what I'm about to say." Zethor remained silent. What was there to say? "The Indomitable," she continued, "is a destroyer-class ship." Captain Park's voice was like steel. "This ship," she said, "is just one of 12 identical vessels we have assigned to this tiny little patch of space. Across the entire Terran colonial navy, we have 400 ships of this class in active service, and that's just the beginning. Above the destroyers are our cruisers, above them are the battleships, and at the very top of the food chain, we have dreadnoughts. Each class is substantially larger and more powerful than the one before it." She paused, letting the information sink in. "My ship has a crew of 800. We have been on patrol for 5 years. In all that time, we have never fired our main weapons at another living being. Today was a first. Do you realize what that means?" Zethor understood perfectly. It meant humanity possessed a level of power so staggering they had never even needed to use it before. Not until the crack had finally pushed them too far. Your intelligence report said humans were primitive, Captain Park went on, her face unreadable. And you weren't wrong about where we were 20 years ago. You were spot on, but we humans are quick studies. We adapt, we innovate, and more than anything, we always plan for the worst-case scenario. She paused again. Through the spiderweb cracks of his view screen, Zethor could see the lifeless hulks of his fleet drifting past. Humanity spent 500 years at war with itself, Captain Park said, her voice dropping lower. On our home world, we turned combat into an art. We forged weapons that could have ended all life, and we came close to doing just that on 3 different occasions. We eventually learned a very painful lesson. Strength without wisdom is just a fast track to oblivion. Power without discipline only leads to extinction. She leaned in a little, her eyes glinting like polished metal. When we finally reached for the stars, we found species just like you. Conquerors, empires built on the backs of others. We watched you steamroll the Valians, the Taurans, the Hikari. We debated for decades whether to reveal ourselves or just remain in the shadows. And then you attacked New Edinburgh. Zethor's voice was barely a breath. We only wanted— I know exactly what you wanted. Captain Park cut him off, her tone sharp as glass. That's why we allowed you to get this far. That's why we didn't just vaporize your fleet the moment you entered this system. We needed to send a message, Commander, not just to your people, but to every empire in this galaxy that believes strength gives them the right to take whatever they please. Zethor glanced in the wreckage of his bridge, at the faces of his dead crewmates, and the shattered remains of his once unstoppable flagship. Message received, he managed to choke out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Good, Captain Park said. Now, this is what's going to happen. We are going to rescue your surviving crew. We are going to provide medical attention to your wounded. We will restore life support on your remaining operational ships. Then, you are going to fly back to your homeworld and tell your leaders precisely what happened here today. They'll demand revenge, Zethor said weakly. The Empire will just send a larger fleet. Captain Park didn't so much as blink. Then we will send more messages, as many as it takes until the lesson is learned. This is what our mercy looks like, Commander Zethor. You would be wise to remember this day, because you will not get a second one. Within the hour, the human rescue operation had begun. From the ruined command deck of his ship, Zethor watched as smaller vessels deployed from the massive warship, the TCS Indomitable. They were sleek, unbelievably fast, and moved with the same unnerving confidence as their mothership. Commander, his communications officer reported, the humans are hailing. They are offering medical aid. Accept it, Zethor commanded without a second thought. What choice did he have? The air on the bridge was growing thin, and his injured crew members were running out of time. Pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Moments later, a human shuttle docked with their command center. The airlock hissed open, and 3 figures in sealed environment suits stepped through, moving with care as they scanned for threats and tested the atmosphere. As the helmets came off, a wave of shock hit Zethor. The soldiers who had just saved him were kids, barely old enough to be considered adults by his people. One of them, pointing to a medical symbol on their suit, asked, "Are you Commander Zethor?" Zethor's voice was a raw whisper. Why are you helping us? We were just trying to kill you." The medic, whose tag read Chen, looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher, a mix of pity and profound sadness. "Because leaving you to die out here would make us just as bad as you are," she said. "Now come on, let's get your people to safety." The humans moved with a speed that was almost terrifying. They deployed portable life support systems, used medicines that healed his soldiers faster than anything Zethor had ever seen, and patched the gaping holes in his crippled ships. They didn't boast or taunt, they just worked, like professionals cleaning up a mess. 2 hours later, Zethor found himself walking through the corridors of the human flagship, the TCS Indomitable. The ship was so advanced it made his own vessel feel like an ancient relic. Every surface was spotless, every system hummed with a quiet, terrifying power. What was even stranger was that the human crew members just walked past him, barely giving him a glance, as if having an enemy commander on their bridge was just another boring Tuesday. He was led into a briefing room where a Captain Park was waiting. She sat at a huge table with a glowing holographic map floating over it and simply pointed to a chair. "Please, have a seat," she offered. "Can I get you some water? Our records show your species can drink it." Zethor just collapsed into the chair, every muscle in his body screaming with exhaustion. A crew member handed him a container of water. He took a hesitant sip, expecting some strange flavor, but it was just pure, cold water. "You have a biological database on us," he said, the reality of it sinking in. "How long have you been watching my people?" "For about 3 years," Captain Park answered, her tone completely matter-of-fact. "We identified your empire as a possible threat not long after we arrived in this sector. We've studied your military tactics, your technology, and your culture. We even learned your language. We know your history." Zethor felt a chill run down his spine. "So, you knew we were going to attack?" "Yes," she said without a hint of emotion. "The Crack Empire has never encountered a species it thought was weaker without trying to conquer it. In that way, you're very predictable." The words were a slap in the face, mostly because he knew they were 100% true. Zethor had lived his entire life believing that the Crack were the superior species, that their endless conquest was a divine right. But now, sitting on an enemy warship saved by the very people he'd tried to annihilate, he was starting to see just how small-minded and foolish his whole worldview had been. Captain Park touched the holographic map, and new images flickered to life. Zethor recognized the planet instantly. "Earth," she said, "our homeworld. Let me tell you a story about us. Our planet is a rough place. It has higher gravity than most life-bearing worlds. The weather is incredibly violent, and it's filled with predators that would give your worst soldiers nightmares. For us, evolution was just one long, brutal war for survival. We weren't the strongest species out there, not even close. We had to get smart just to avoid being wiped out." The hologram shifted, showing scenes from humanity's own bloody history. Savage wars, horrifying new weapons, and entire cities reduced to rubble. "We spent 5,000 years fighting each other," Captain Park explained. "We'd build these incredible civilizations, only to watch them crumble into dust. We became experts at finding new ways to kill, chemical agents, engineered plagues, atomic bombs. On 3 separate occasions, we came within days of making our own species extinct." Zethor could only watch in horror as the holographic cities disappeared in blinding flashes of light. He saw those sickening mushroom clouds bloom and knew that millions had died in the blink of an eye. "But nearly destroying ourselves taught us something incredibly important," Captain Park said, her voice dropping to a low whisper. "It taught us that strength by itself is completely meaningless. A victory without wisdom is just a defeat that takes a little longer to happen. We nearly died because we were too powerful for our own good." The images changed again, this time showing the development of human starships. He saw the clunky, primitive rockets at first, then more advanced designs, and finally the fusion-powered vessels his spies had warned him about. But then new ships appeared, ships so sleek and powerful they looked like they belonged in a different universe. When we finally discovered faster-than-light travel, we spent a full 10 years just debating if we should even introduce ourselves to the galaxy, she went on. Instead, we sent out probes, silent observers. We learned about everyone else out here, the peaceful traders, the territorial clans, and the ever-expanding empires, like yours. A horrifying thought began to form in Zethor's mind. "You were afraid." "We were cautious," she corrected him gently. "There's a big difference. We built our entire military around the absolute worst-case scenario. We kept asking ourselves one question. What if we meet a species whose technology is centuries ahead of ours? What if we run into an enemy so hostile that victory is impossible? How do you survive that?" She gestured to the ship all around them. "This is our answer. We decided to create overwhelming, undeniable power, but to chain it to absolute self-control. Every single human warship is designed to fight a theoretical enemy we pray we never find. Our weapons can crack a planet like an egg. Our shields can take a direct hit from a supernova. Our ships can move faster and jump farther than anything else in this galaxy. A cold, sickening dread washed over Zethar. All this time, the Crack had been strutting around the galaxy thinking they were giants. They thought their conquests were proof of their superiority. But the truth was, they had just been lucky. Lucky they'd never stumbled upon this sleeping giant, and even luckier that these humans chose peace when they could have chosen power. "So why show yourselves now?" he finally managed to ask. "Why not just stay hidden forever?" "Because hiding isn't the same thing as living," Captain Park replied. "And because we've been watching what your empire does to those who can't fight back. The Valians, the Taurans, species you crushed that never had a chance. We talked about stepping in, but we decided it wasn't our job to police the galaxy." Her gaze sharpened, locking onto his. "And then you attacked New Edinburgh, a civilian colony filled with families. You gave them a 1-hour warning to surrender their entire planet, and then you started destroying their orbital stations without any real reason. You left us no choice." We thought you were weak," Zethar admitted, the words tasting like poison. "We know," she said. "That was the idea, but being weak is not an invitation for conquest. And being vulnerable is not an excuse for violence. My people learned those lessons through an unimaginable amount of pain, and now it seems it's our turn to be the teachers." Captain Park stood and walked over to the massive viewport. Outside, the shattered remains of the Crack invasion fleet tumbled silently through the darkness of space. "I'm going to tell you something that's not a secret," she said. "The TCS Indomitable is 5 years old. In that time, we've explored 20 different star systems. We've made first contact with 4 other species that could have been hostile. None of them were, because a simple display of our capabilities was all it took to show them that a fight would be a very bad idea for everyone. Today was the first time in 5 years I've had to fire my main cannon at another living thing." She turned back to face him, her expression carved from stone. "Do you realize what that means? Humanity built the most powerful military in this entire quadrant of the galaxy with the primary goal of never, ever having to use it. We win by making it crystal clear that starting a fight with us is suicide. That is what true power looks like." Zethar's mind raced through his own long career. 47 star systems conquered, hundreds of battles won, thousands of lives extinguished. He had always seen himself as a powerful warrior, but he had only ever started fights he knew for a fact he could win. "So, what happens to us now?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Captain Park walked back to her command chair. "Now, you go back to your empire," she said calmly. "You tell them everything you saw here. You make them understand that humanity is not weak, we are not primitive, and we are not the easy prey you were hoping for. You tell them we offer peace and friendship to anyone who comes to us with respect. But if they refuse to listen," and here her face became a mask of pure ice, "if they send another fleet, we will tear it to pieces, and the one after that. Eventually, your Croc Empire will learn that attacking humanity is a death sentence. The only question is how many of your own people you're willing to sacrifice before you finally understand that." It was a long 3 months before Zethar stood before the High Council of the Croth Empire. 3 months of limping home in broken warships, of silent, haunting journeys through the void, and of sleepless nights spent replaying the battle in his mind. 3 months of pure, gut-wrenching terror, because he knew he had to deliver a message that would shatter the very foundation of his entire civilization. Imagine being put on trial for your life, not because you made a mistake, but because you told the truth. That was me. I stood alone in a cavern carved from the bedrock of my world, facing 12 of our empire's highest commanders. They looked at me from their massive thrones, their faces dripping with disgust. The eldest finally spoke, his voice rumbling like an earthquake. "Commander Zethar," he began, "you led a fleet of 200 of our best ships against a backwater human colony. You came back with 137 broken vessels and 63 completely gone. Over 4,000 of our bravest soldiers are dead. Tell us why we shouldn't execute you for this failure." I had rehearsed what I would say 1,000 times, but standing there, I knew my life depended on them believing a truth so wild it sounded like a lie. "Honored Council," I said, my voice steady even though my stomach was in knots. "Our intel on the humans wasn't just wrong, it was a catastrophic deception. They aren't primitive, they aren't weak. In fact, they are without a doubt the most advanced species we have ever met." The room was dead silent until one of the younger commanders let out a sarcastic laugh. "Advanced? They just figured out faster than light travel." "No," I corrected him, my voice echoing in the chamber. "They let us think that. The reality is, humanity has had this tech for ages. They've been observing us, learning our strategies, our technology, our every weakness. When we attacked their colony, we weren't the predators. We were lambs walking into a slaughterhouse they had built just for us." I signaled for the holographic display. The air shimmered, showing the battle. You could see our entire armada unleashing hell on a single human ship, the Indomitable. Our most powerful cannons hit their shields and vanished like raindrops on a hot stone. Then, the hologram showed their response, a single, perfect beam of light that sliced my own flagship clean in two. "One human vessel," I stated plainly. "Not even their top-of-the-line model wiped out our whole fleet and didn't get so much as a paint scratch. Their shields are flawless. Their hulls are made of materials we can't even identify. Their weapons put out 10 times more energy than our science ever thought possible." Another commander shot up. "Then why are you here? If they're so mighty, why did they let you go?" "That," I said, lowering my voice, "is the most critical part of this entire report. They let us go because they wanted a messenger. They sent me back to tell you exactly what I witnessed." I met the eyes of each council member. Humanity doesn't want war. They could have turned our entire fleet into space dust. Instead, they surgically disabled our ships, rescued every last survivor, healed our wounded, and sent us on our way. Captain Park of the Indomitable told me herself, humanity's ultimate weapon is the one they never have to fire. They win by making it obvious that picking a fight with them is just another word for suicide. The eldest commander leaned forward, his ancient eyes narrowed. "Are you saying we've encountered a power greater than ourselves that chooses peace over conquest?" "Yes, honored elder. And I'm saying we need to learn from it. The Croc Empire has always lived by one rule: the strong take what they want. But humanity offers a different way. They're stronger than us in every measurable category, and yet they have zero interest in ruling us." "That's weakness," one commander yelled. "They're just cowards, afraid to use their own power." "No," I shot back, surprised at how sure I was. "It isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Captain Park told me that humanity nearly wiped itself out 3 different times with its own inventions. They learned the hardest lesson there is. Power without restraint is just a very complicated way to destroy yourself. They built their military to be impossibly strong for one single reason, so they would never, ever be forced to use it. For 300 years, my people, the Krothak, thought we were the baddest kids on the block. Our whole empire was built on the idea that might makes right. So when we went to squash the humans, I figured it would be just another day at the office. But what if everything you knew about strength was wrong? What if the real power wasn't in taking over, but in something else entirely? As I was being rescued from the wreckage of my own ship by the very people I was sent to eliminate, it all clicked. Standing before my own council, I had to tell them our entire way of life was a lie. The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. You could practically hear their minds grinding against a truth they didn't want to accept. Finally, the eldest commander broke the tension. "So, what's your proposal, Commander? We just roll over and surrender?" "No," I said calmly. "I propose we go talk to them. The humans are offering a peaceful partnership to anyone who approaches them as equals," I explained. "They have technology we can't begin to imagine, knowledge that could save our empire from stagnating. They can help us be better." Another councilman sneered, "Or we could send a bigger fleet, avenge this insult." A chill went down my spine. That fleet will be annihilated too, I said, my voice dead serious. Captain Park was very clear. They will defend themselves, and they have 400 ships just like hers, not even counting the bigger, scarier classes. If we send 1,000 of our warships, they will take every single one of them apart like a child taking apart a toy. And they won't even break a sweat doing it, because they are that far ahead of us. You almost sound like you admire them, a council member accused me, his tone full of suspicion. I do, I confessed, without skipping a beat. They are everything we pretend to be, brilliant, powerful, and unbeatable. The only difference is, they balance that strength with wisdom. They could rule this whole galaxy by force if they chose to. Instead, they're asking for friends. The argument went on for hours. I didn't back down. I answered every question, showed them the data from my ship's black box, and repeated the core truth over and over. This was not an enemy we could ever hope to defeat. At last, the eldest council member rose. The council has reached a verdict. We will send diplomats to the humans. We will ask for peace. But understand this, Commander Zethor, he growled, his voice like stone against stone. You have asked us to gamble the entire foundation of our civilization on your word. If you are wrong about these humans, if this is some kind of trick, you will pay for it with your life. I understand, I replied, but I'm not wrong. I saw their power firsthand, and I was a recipient of their mercy. The choice is simple. We can either evolve with the galaxy, or we can become a dusty old history lesson about empires that refuse to change. 2 months later, our diplomatic ships cautiously entered orbit around Earth. There were no threats, only polite professional greetings. Negotiations began for peace and a technology-sharing agreement. I was there, not as a commander anymore, but as an advisor, looking down at that stunning blue and white marble from an observation deck. It was a truly gorgeous world, and I could see how a place of such breathtaking and sometimes brutal beauty could forge such a tough species. A human diplomat, Ambassador Martinez, came to stand next to me. Commander Zethor, she said, using my old title as a sign of respect. I wanted to say thank you. Captain Park told us what you did. You chose wisdom when most would have chosen pride. I gave a small, tired smile. It's an easy choice to make when your pride is about to get you and everyone you know vaporized. That's fair, she chuckled, but you'd be surprised how many would still choose pride. We've studied our own history. Every single empire that was built on conquest eventually fell. They either rot from the inside or they finally run into someone tougher, she continued. We just decided we wanted to be the ones who finally broke that cycle for good. It took me a second to process that. So you built a power so immense, I said, the realization dawning on me, that you would never be tempted to actually use it. Exactly. Peace is a lot easier to maintain when every other power in the galaxy knows that a war with you would be catastrophic for them and a complete waste of time for us. We call it peace through strength, but it's a strength guided by wisdom. Strength alone just starts an arms race that nobody can win. I thought about our own empire, the 47 systems we held down with an iron fist, all the species we ruled through fear. I thought about how much effort we wasted just holding on. I think, I said slowly, the Krothek have a lot to learn from you, and it has nothing to do with better ships. We've been so obsessed with conquering for centuries, I admitted, that we never stopped to ask ourselves, why? Ambassador Martinez smiled warmly. Figuring out you might be on the wrong path is the first step on a better one. Who knows? A few generations from now, maybe the Krothek Empire won't be famous for the territory it took, but for the new worlds it helped create. Maybe, I said, feeling a flicker of real hope for the first time in a very long time. Outside the window, human ships, the same kind that had torn my fleet apart, drifted by like silent guardians. They were the protectors of a peace so profound it was backed by unimaginable power. I remembered that gut-wrenching terror I felt 3 months ago, watching my flagship die. I once looked at that human ship and saw a monster. Now, I knew I was looking at our salvation. In one heart-stopping instant, I saw it all, our entire future. It wasn't a galaxy dominated by whoever had the most firepower, but one where real strength was a shield for everyone, not just a hammer for conquest. The second that lone human ship appeared, we Krothek understood with terrifying clarity that our warrior path was nothing but a road to extinction. Yet, inside that awesome power, we saw something else entirely. A chance to become more, an invitation to a galactic community built on teamwork instead of tyranny. It wasn't going to be a walk in the park. Old ways die hard. We've still got hardliners back home shouting for one last blaze of glory, one final battle to prove our might. But their voices are fading, drowned out by the simple, powerful truth of what humanity truly is. I rested my hand on the cold viewport, staring down at the planet Earth. What a brutal world to come from, I thought. It had clearly molded a people just as tough. And yet, against all odds, that constant fight for survival had taught them compassion. Their endless wars against each other had forced them to see the value in unity. After staring their own annihilation in the face, they learned that true power isn't the ability to crush your enemies, but the wisdom to spare them. "We saw their capital ship," I murmured, my breath fogging the glass, and right then, we knew. The war was over before it started. We had lost on every level. They simply made the choice not to wipe us out, and that single act of mercy had changed the galaxy forever.